This is my book review for Poetry for Dummies. It's a pretty standard for Dummies book. Same format if you're familiar with it. Begins with an introduction, goes over very basic things, gets into the meat, and then the last they have their part of tens. Now, with that being said, the For Dummies book, the one problem I have with them is they're almost too much for dummies. I just am in the middle of a For Dummies cooking book, and like an example, they'll talk about what a pan is. You know what I mean? So I guess it's good if you don't have like the confidence in whatever topic you're learning about, or if you really are that ignorant. But you know, either way, so you have a lot of like superfluous fluff in here. The one part that I liked is they talk about the prosody of different poems. They explain the terms for the different feet, what the names are depending on the syllabic structure of it, the names for the difference of meters, you know, how many meters a poem has, and it also talks about the aforementioned structures I just said for different types of poems, including, you know, haikus and ghazals. So they talk about the prosody of poems, and also, like I said, you know, the superfluous stuff you don't need to know about, like what is a poem, you know, what the difference between a poem and prose is. If you're an adult with half a mind, if you have like some semblance of education, you should know what that is. You know, so they do talk about stuff like that. So anyways, superfluous stuff, the prosody. They also talk about the history of poetry, which is kind of interesting. They start from ancient Mesopotamia, first civilization, first written language. So that's around 5000 BC. So they do that, ancient Egypt, and then they go into ancient Greece, Homeric, classical Greece, also Roman antiquity, and then they go into medieval. To digress a little bit, they also talk about the Bible, the Psalms. The Old Testament does have poetry in it. It was, you know, like the Psalms. I mean, it was written by Hebrew poets. The Bhagavad Gita, another religious text that's also written by poets. So anyways, progressing into the future, you go all the way into AD and medieval, and then you get into like William Shakespeare, the 1600s, the 1700s, the Enlightenment era, and then most of the history focuses on like the 19th century, 20th century. 19th century was huge for poetry because that was the main artistic medium back then. You know, today we have, you know, TV, movies, internet. Unfortunately, back then, that's kind of bad to say. Unfortunately for them, they had to listen to poetry. Not that there's anything wrong with poetry. I like writing poetry, but if that was your main form of entertainment, I could see how it would get kind of dull. It does stimulate your intellectual your intellectual faculties, but, you know, anyways, so yeah, focus on 19th and 20th century, and it goes all the way up to, like the beat poets of the 1960s, Maya Angelou. So the historical part is very interesting. They also gives you tips and practices to get the creative juices flowing you try to write poetry yourself. It's more of like a manual, so you can pick out the pieces you want. I read it from front to back, and I skimmed through the appendices. But overall, taking away the superfluous stuff in the beginning of the book, I thought it was pretty decent. So, yep, that is my review.